Welcome to our coffee chat. It's the last one of the year. We host these meetings once a month as a space for our network to come together and share our insights. We share content, we share things that we're learning. We usually have a guest speaker, and then it's a dynamic, active conversation in which people share and ask questions. So it's really been a valuable space for me. I'm very grateful to all of you for making it possible. And so just a couple of little details for all of you. This is an interactive space. So I ask you to put your camera on, jump in and ask questions, participate. I think that's what makes this the most unique. And when, the chats that the people like the most are the ones where folks are participating. So really invite you and encourage you to do that. Now, today, my name is Lindsay. I'm Managing Director of PCMI. I'm usually the one to host these chats. And today, unlike, I'm going to jump here and just go back in a moment. Unlike most of our chats, today's a wrap up. Today is a wrap up of the year. And what I'm going to do today is share the results of our annual e-commerce blueprint that we do every year. So it will be a little bit more heavy on the content side, and I'm going to be talking a lot, but you guys already know you can jump in and ask questions at any time, and I really welcome your perspective. And, I love it when people take the data that we're presenting and expound upon it, share their own personal anecdote, or even share something that maybe contradicts what we're saying. That makes it very interesting. So I really welcome you to do that. And now before I get into that, I just want to do a quick recap. These were this is the time we spent together this year. We had a lot on cross-border payments. I think was a very key trend that we looked at in our coffee chats, as well as in the work for our clients. We at PCMI did a lot of work in cross-border payments, and a lot of the conferences and events that I participated in were related to cross-border. And we saw, and of course, this question on wallets, this question on RTP, account-based payments, A2A payments continues to be a massive trend that we're seeing in Latin America and around the world. So, one of my favorite ones this year was the social seller in Latin America with Eric Padilla from Ada. I found that, that particular chat had this hypothesis that if we can improve the user experience, small businesses in emerging markets are really willing to formalize and pay fees, enjoy the digital economy, even though there's this resistance that we perceive. So that was one of my favorites. Anyone else want to share which one they found most interesting or engaging or insightful or something they learned? No? Okay. Quiet group today. We also had Nick's very fascinating presentation where we all got to learn a little bit what is behind what makes Nick tick. So that was also very, very cool.
I'd like to say on that one, it was interesting that most of the questions were revolving around dispute resolution, even though that wasn't really what I was talking about much, but it became part of the conversation. And I'm really glad to hear that. I think a lot of people are starting to realize how important it is. So that was quite good to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's and any of these A2A or new rail conversations, that's the challenge that a lot of these new systems are facing. So we got B2B payments, remittances, cross-border. Awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, that's just a quick wrap up for us to reflect on what we've done this year. I'm hearing some noise. If everyone can mute if you've got some background noise. Thank you. Okay. All right. So guys, we'll get into, the intended topic today. And I really would love to hear your comments. It's a lot of information, so you're going to kind of be absorbing it. But if you have questions or want to spark a conversation, I really welcome it. Every year since 2017 or more or less, we've been doing this e-commerce analysis, and in Latin America, we've looked at 15 countries. Sometimes even it expands to 17, but the core countries that we look at are 15 countries across South America, Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. And our data, what we seek to do is look at the entire sphere of card not present or remote transactions, which includes all alternative payment methods, which includes cross-border, which includes verticals that are not sized very often, such as gaming, gambling, SaaS, other digital goods, things like that, and really provide a comprehensive look at the market size of e-commerce. And now a lot of this data is available publicly from WorldPay, from eMarketer, but our analysis goes a level deeper in that it's completely comprehensive in that way. And then we also provide all of the technical details so you can understand really what is in this data. So I'm going to present some of the key slides. We will be making the full presentation available. And then the data that is behind the slides is available for purchase. The full database of data points if you want the raw data and you want the full complete picture, either for the whole region or by country. But we'll just kind of go through the highlights. I love when we're able to produce this because it first of all, it gives data that is very hard to find and that doesn't really exist anywhere else, and then it paints the picture of what's going on. So so just to start us off, we know that the pandemic boom of e-commerce has subsided, but nevertheless, the industry e-commerce volume still grew 25% in 2024. How do we know this? The way that we do this analysis is that we first do a very deep desk research looking at official, not survey data, but official transactional data. And then we complement that with over 50 interviews in the region with acquirers, with PSPs, with merchants, with issuers, with folks that really not only know the industry, but actually see the data, see the transactional data. So we're confident that this is the best data out there for Latin America. We also have a similar analysis for Asia. And then we get all the juicy qualitative insights from the interviews. So in fact, so in 2024, the industry is still growing at around 25%. We're at $633 billion of e-commerce volume in 2024, and you can just see how this has expanded exponentially since we first started doing this analysis. And now that growth rate is declining, right? But staying at 19% out of the CAGR through 2027. So, but it's fallen under 20% for the first time in a decade. So, growth is starting to trail off as we reach some sort of maturity in some markets. But it's really impressive as to how this market continues to grow at double digits. And every year I ask myself, how is it possible that this is still, after 10 years, this is still growing at more than 20%? And just these changes that we've observed have really continued to fuel the industry, right? So the first thing that we've talked about ad nauseum this year, but I want to continue to harp on it because I don't believe that the industry has fully grasped the impact of Pix, right? Pix in Brazil, and then the impact that that's having on other countries in the region. So the increasing adoption of account-based payment methods, especially Pix. Why do these unlock e-commerce? They provide access to digital payments for people who don't have a credit card. They enable people in Brazil, debit really isn't permitted online. So it's a replacement of debit cards for e-commerce. Merchants love it because it's cheap and instant. They receive funds instantly. And so it's really driven a whole new generation of merchants to accept payments online. And in many cases, it becomes the national payment method. And there's a lot of affection around that as well, as long as the user experience is working well. So this has been.
Lindsay, quick question. It's Kevin Carpenter from Alberta. Hi.
Yeah.
Long-time listener, first-time caller. Given the size of the Brazilian market and the exponential growth of Pix and the numbers that you've provided, do you have any sense of how the rest of Latin America is trending on uptake of digitalization? Is Pix the predominant driver of those numbers, or are you seeing similar uptakes in other countries?
Yes. So Pix is there's slides to speak to this, but really quickly, Pix is absolutely the #1 driver of this. So when we look at the region, Pix alone is more than 20% of e-commerce for the whole region. So it's absolutely massive. Its impact is absolutely massive. Okay. Now, when we look to other regions, this trend is picking up around the region. So in Colombia, in Peru, in unexpected places like Bolivia, in Paraguay, in Uruguay, in Costa Rica, in Guatemala, in Argentina, these are all in varying phases of duplication of Pix. And then when we see what we've learned from the interviews and from the data is that whether or not you have an official branded low cost A2A system, bank transfers and account access payment methods are what is driving new digitalization. And in Mexico, for example, you don't hear that much about a payment method. However, SPAY, right, the interoperable bank rails, is the fastest growing payment method. So we'll get to that in a little bit more detail. But Pix absolutely is, 10 times more than any other country at this point.
Can I jump in and make an observation? As someone who's built global payment infrastructure, I am so impressed with Pix. It has been amazing how well they've done it, and it is absolutely a model that should be copied by as many other countries as can. If Pix were to do international, it would be problematic, but Argentina should copy Pix, and Venezuela should copy Pix, and Mexico should copy. Everyone should be copying Pix. It's really impressive. UPI in India is not well thought through. They actually did a reasonable job, but they didn't understand what they're walking into. Pix is the model to copy. I'm so impressed with it.
So we'll get there. We have a lot of more detail on that, so we'll get there. Number 2 is the aggressive entrance of marketplaces from Asia. Now, this has been happening over the past several years, but it's only accelerating, right? We first saw a very decent success of AliExpress more than, starting 10 years ago, and that has only accelerated with Shopee, with Shein, with Temu. Not only are those guys coming and putting pressure on local merchants, but local merchants are now understanding I need to have more low-cost variety products on my marketplace to be competitive. So they're raising the bar in terms of variety, pricing, user experience across the board. Okay. Digital services. These are big growth drivers. They're not yet huge volume drivers, but they are growth drivers, specifically gaming, gambling, and SaaS. SaaS is a really interesting one to look at as small businesses, so software as a service. As business overall becomes more professionalized and digital, SaaS is going to be a massive driver. Okay. Now, and we've gotten a huge number of inquiries around gambling as regulation starts to get clarified, and this moves more and more onto the online channel. Gambling is really coming front and center. Cross-border is a major growth driver in the Central America and the Caribbean, very often fueled by local payment and logistics intermediaries that are helping cross-border be more accessible. And now cross-border e-commerce has already been pretty deeply entrenched in Brazil and in Mexico, and that's continuing to expand to secondary markets. And then simply organic growth as people get more familiar with e-commerce. For a long time, e-commerce has been really up until 2020, 2021, 2022. E-commerce was really concentrated in the affluent credit card holders. And that's been slowly trickling down into a wider swath of the population, and then people start to spend more online. So this will grow as people transfer more of their spend from in-store to online. As they get more comfortable, things get more secure, and as the variety and user experience improves. Okay. So, and this gives us a little bit of insight into this, right? How does Latin America fit into the rest of the world? We can see how, in terms of volume, this is only retail, okay? So we just saw 633 billion for all of e-commerce. When we just look at retail, which is easier to compare across the world, we see Latin America is quite small, right, compared to other regions. in pure volume, right? But the growth is really impressive. I mean, even Asia, which is going through, you know, you've got a mature Chinese market, you've got mature markets in Asia, so those are probably dragging the growth rates down a bit compared to Southeast Asia, for example. But Latin America is really careening forward in terms of growth compared to other regions. And look at how the per capita spend is compared to Asia, you know, a little less than half. So there's still a lot of room for individuals to spend more online. And that runway or that window is where, you know, companies with competitive levers are going to be pushing, right, to increase that volume spend per capita. Okay. So looking at how this volume breaks down by vertical and which verticals are important, retail is really interesting because retail is the biggest and it's also the fastest growing, which is kind of unusual. But retail retail started out as electronics and high ticket items, but increasingly over the years, retail supply has become more and more diverse, more and more varied, moving into pharmaceuticals, moving into cosmetics, moving into pharmacy, moving into food and grocery. And now you get, as little as $1, cell phone covers and things that people are buying online, small ticket accessories, which just helps that spend to exceedingly grow. Other stars here is this yellow box, which is gaming, growing at 23%. Also SaaS growing at 19%. And then you've got ride hailing that continue, delivery apps continue to grow. Travel is still has some very attractive growth. But retail, very competitive, but as we see, very rapidly growing at the same time. And what this chart tries to do is kind of put our countries in the region in some kind of map, right? How are these markets operating at the local level? And what does that mean for how we want to play in these markets, right? So the bottom axis here is e-commerce penetration of GDP. So this really relates to how much people are spending. Okay, and you can see that Brazil is the farthest along. Chile, Colombia, and Peru, kind of impressive for those guys, are pretty far along, right? It's a large expenditure for how big their GDP is, okay? Now along the y-axis here is e-commerce penetration of adults. And this tells us how many people are spending in e-commerce. And the majority of our countries are here in this green cluster, which we call digitizing, meaning the population is becoming more digitized, and yet underpenetrated in expenditure. So you've got, 80, 70, 80% of people have made an online purchase before, but they're spending very little. So this is where you have the opportunity to really push expenditure. Then you've got Bolivia, Guatemala, Paraguay, which are kind of digitally resistant still and underpenetrated. So this just helps us.
Do you have older information? Because this is a fascinating chart. Do you have like the last couple of years and see how they've moved? Because that would be fascinating.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, we did have this chart from last year, and we had a couple. Actually, I'd have to go back and look there were a couple of countries that really moved. But overall, it maintained more or less the same. But it would be, yeah, you're right. We should track, how these moved over time from last year.
Lindsay, Armotone here from Dominican Republic. I have a question. I see that Dominican Republic is at 80%, and it doesn't surprise me, but most people that I know, they are doing e-commerce, but not in the Dominican Republic.
Correct.
So it's buying especially in Amazon and that kind of stuff. So it's more an alternative abroad e-commerce versus the physical retail where you cannot get as much as you could get in Amazon, or on the other hand, on a more attractive price point.
Yes, agreed. DR in particular is this very interesting market for cross-border, and to the US particularly. Absolutely. Great. Okay, so that's just kind of a high level overview.
Lindsay, I have a question.
Yes. Oh, great.
Okay. Okay. I was watching at first that the e-commerce will decrease, no? 21% is 25% increase. And I want and listen your opinion about what would be the impact, what would be the impact of cross-border transactions in the e-commerce growth, no?
Yes.
Because I think it will be an impact in these transactions. I can understand the why the forecast is less the forecast, the 2025 forecast is less than 24, the 24 result, because I think if cross-border transactions increase, it will have an impact in the e-commerce.
Yes, so absolutely. So we have a cross-border section, but quickly, cross-border is representing between 15 to 20% of the market, and it is growing faster. Now that's for the whole region, okay? Now, and it is growing faster than domestic e-commerce. Okay, so when we just look at a little bit faster. So when we look at cross-border, it's definitely a driver. But the entire region, when we consider domestic, which is 75% or is about 80% of the market, that's just growing a little more slowly because of its size. But when you just look at cross-border, I agree, it's on an acceleration path. Yeah, we'll have some slides on that.
Lindsay, may I one more question?
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Hi,
No.
this is Pedro. Hi, how are you? Lindsay, do we have any driving forces for the trends on the last by country? Like, what are the driving forces? Are they the same drivers for each country, or like Peru is driven by gaming, Colombia driven
Yes,
by
so of course, every country has, those are high level, and they apply to most markets, but every market has its own circumstances. So this deck, we have an extended version that has one slide for each country that will be available soon. So stay tuned.
all right.
Lindsay. Hi, Lindsay. This is Alicia. Can I ask you something quick?
Hi, Alicia. Nice to see
Hi.
you.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick question, because I am a little surprised, or I don't know, I'm having a lot of questions in my mind when you mentioned that account-based payments, or PIX, for example, is one of the main drivers for e-commerce. But the questions that cross my mind is that e-commerce is a very particular environment with, for example, fraud is a very key area that we know typically is much, there is much threats in e-commerce versus card present transactions. And I know that in the case of PIX or this kind of type of payments, fraud has been an opportunity because we have had anecdotal information of how strategies are being addressed, or, for example, disputes. And in addition to that, e-commerce transactions usually, in retail vertical, there is the placement of orders, but still the merchants need to check, if the particular merchandise is available, blah, blah, blah. So there is a very particular cycle of the purchase transaction. So that is when it comes to my mind that how this type of payments is addressing all those particularities of the e-commerce.
Yeah.
And being one. So I just posting the questions. I don't know if you actually are going to talk about it in the next sections,
Yes.
but I just wanted to raise
Okay.
those exactly
No,
questions.
absolutely. So fraud and general user experience type things are always come up in relation to PIX and A2A payments. But what you really need to understand and what is that those, so, a lot of people say, well, PIX doesn't have incentives, PIX doesn't have loyalty, PIX doesn't have consumer protection. There's a lot of fraud that hasn't been well safeguarded against. Those issues have not been problematic for users. They have not been problematic for consumers or merchants. So the benefits of these systems far outweigh any disadvantage so far.
Okay.
Now we have, there could be some major fraud attack that impacts millions. Some of these issues could start to scale and be more problematic, but so far, those disadvantages have not been a problem.
Offset those kind of
They have not upset adoption
so far. Okay.
so far.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great question. Okay, so looking a little bit more into detail as to what's driving the growth, I'm gonna move kind of quickly into payment methods. But here we start to get into some more country data, right? But so you can see the importance of retail, which is this dark red color across the region, and some countries like Mexico are impressively heavy in retail. And what the major trend in retail e-commerce that we're seeing is the marketplaceification, right, across the region. This has been happening for a long time, but with the increasing pressure, there's this increasingly consolidated corridor from Asia to Latin America, where these guys here are increasingly coming in with very good social media marketing, very targeted marketing, very good user experience, very low prices, and partnerships with payment providers that allow them to accept local payment. And all of a sudden, they're very competitive local players. And you can even see, local players saying, look, part of our major strategy is increasing imported goods from China on our marketplace that are price competitive, because we can beat them logistics wise, right? If we can import in bulk, if we can get it right, what products people want, imported in bulk, have better fulfillment and better pricing, then we can compete with them. But this hasn't always been a forefront center strategy for local players. So this is local players becoming marketplaces and working to compete with the Chinese. And then you've got the American marketplaces also with their very strong branding coming in. And so we're seeing increasing concentration of the market among a few players in retail.
Lindsay, a question with respect to the Asian competitors. I know in Europe there's a lot of discussion about it, because on the one hand they are not very eco-friendly. If you send a package for $5,
Right.
China to Paris, but on the other hand, there is a kind of international agreement that the logistics costs from China to Europe are subsidized heavily. Is that kind of regulation also present in the logistics from China to Latin America? So is that let's say a competitive disadvantage for local players here?
What's happening is that, what I would say is that a lot of local regulators are waking up to the fact that these Chinese guys are putting a lot of undue pressure on domestic players. And so you're seeing more tariffs and tax being imposed. So in Brazil, we just recently, Correios, the post office, saw a 30% drop in cross-border parcels in response to a recent hike in taxes on low-value imported goods, okay? The same type of tariff situation is being discussed for Chile. In Argentina, the opposite is occurring because a new government came into place, which is deregulating all of Argentina. And so there were restrictions removed, and that spiked cross-border e-commerce. So I don't think the sustainability question has really come into play. To be honest, nobody really cares, especially consumers. And a lot of consumers might not really understand that the goods are actually coming from China and they're actually doing an import. Really what is the most impactful is whether or not there's a tax imposed on low value parcel imports. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so here we start to look at growth by country, and these bars are showing the size of the market, so you can see just how massive Brazil is. And then, but which are the countries where we really have a good growth opportunity? I mean, Brazil is still growing 19%. We can't say that that's low, right? That's still impressively strong. But when we really want to find the peaks of growth, we see Mexico here. We see countries, Ecuador, we see Guatemala, and Paraguay having kind of these peaks. And these are countries that are still behind in digitization, even Mexico. So these are countries where the population is increasingly adopting digital payment methods. Some of these countries like Paraguay and Guatemala are having rapid adoption of bank transfers as a payment method, and that's just opening up the space. Did I see? Going to the chat to see some comments. Okay, great. So mobile is another huge driver. Okay, we know, many Latin Americans access digital services for the first time on their phone. So mobile at this point, is representing, 80% of the market or so. It's really impressive. Even for big ticket items, mobile or tablet have far overtaken desktop, growing quite quickly as well. And why is this still growing, right? First of all, increasing improvements in user experience, making it more seamless. But I think the big driver now is that commerce journeys, especially for young people, are beginning in social media, right? You're on Instagram, you're on Facebook, you're on TikTok, and you get exposed to brands. And a lot of shopping and brand comparison and brand education begins on Instagram or other social media platforms. Then maybe you get redirected to a website, still on your mobile phone, to make the purchase. But social media is where these commerce journeys are beginning, where brands establish relationships with consumers. I mean, how many of you guys have, go to Instagram, even in our older generation, are looking for products on Instagram or other platforms? For younger people, it's exponentially so. So just a quick, Clifford, for everyone, all of our coffee chats are recorded and posted to YouTube. And you can just Google PCMI or on YouTube, PCMI coffee chats, and you'll find the page with all of our recordings. And this one will be uploaded, later in the week, as well as all the ones we did this year. Okay. Okay, so getting onto payment methods. This is often the juiciest part of the conversation. So where are we in terms of penetration of these payment methods in e-commerce? And Alicia, this will help you see a little bit what I was just referencing. So this compares 2023 and 2024. Look at how credit card has declined. Okay. Credit card is still in the lead, right? It's still more than double that of Pix. However, it's declining. And Pix has overtaken debit card. Okay, and so Pix climbed. This is share of all of e-commerce in Latin America, right? So Pix is impressively large. Now, what is interesting about debit is that, debit grew almost zero in Brazil. It's pretty much, Pix has pretty much replaced debit. But debit is growing faster than the average in every other market. Okay, so debit is still, even though RTPs are ramping up in other countries, debit is still the primary way that people access their funds. Okay, if they don't have credit, debit is the primary way people are accessing their funds. Digital wallets staying stable. When we talk about digital wallets here, we're talking about primarily PayPal and Mercado Pago.
Lindsay,
Yes.
do you have the absolute values so we could compare if actually in reality there was an increase in e-commerce? Because this is just the percentage of the share of wallet, but if there was actually an increase on the absolute values of e-commerce, that can give us a little bit of a different view as well.
Yeah, we do have the data. Yep, the data is available for purchase, and in a database format. So if you're curious, I'm gonna send out information on that to everyone. But the absolute values are of it. So to your point, the share of credit card is declining, but the volumes are growing. The volumes are growing for credit card at 12%. So none of these the only one that really is not growing is cash. Every other payment method is still growing. It's just, is it growing faster or slower than the average, and is it gaining or losing share, right? So great question. Cool. So when we look at Pix overall as a payment method, this is a slide that we have that we update as soon as the data becomes available from the central bank. Now this is Brazil P2M, so we're talking all purchases, not just e-commerce. This is often online, but you can just see how it's ramped up, right? And it's blown past debit, and it's starting to get to the same level as credit. Now credit, again, credit volumes are not falling. What Pix and other A2A schemes are doing is primarily cannibalizing cash, right? Expanding the pie of digital payments. The question is, as this continues, as this trajectory continues, is credit card going to maintain growth, or is it going to start to dip? In e-commerce, we can see, Pix is growing more than double the rate of credit card. So, there's different hypotheses we can make about this, but everything is still on the rise. Okay. When we look at Pix though, and we talk, the projections are based on, our interviews, basically historic growth, and then what the interviews are what people in the industry who are doing this day in and day out think is going to happen, combined with what we know the Pix roadmap might be. We've projected Pix to be more than 50% of the market in 2027. Okay, so it's just remarkable that the transformation that Pix is having in Brazil. And then what's going to happen next year that will continue to drive it. Already Pix recorded record levels of transactions on Black Friday. So just showing how important this is for e-commerce, of 240 million transactions per day. Now this is compared to the average transaction per day for UPI India is 500,000. Now India is more than 1 billion people, pretty much almost 4 times the population of Brazil. Okay, so and Brazil and Pix is at the halfway mark of transactions for UPI. So to your point, Nick, Brazil is first in class, best in class in how this was done, how it was rolled out, level of adoption. And even though, yes, there's cases of fraud, there have been problems with fraud, there are no chargebacks, there are no consumer protections, all of these things that we associate the advantages of the card industry, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter and has not mattered yet.
Sorry, is it 240 million or 240,000? Because you got 500,000.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I
I think it's million. So this is 500 million.
Okay.
Thank you for calling that out. And do you guys hear me? I'm getting some. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Loud and clear.
Yes.
Okay. I was just getting a note that I was quiet. So what's going to happen
I
in
think it's
2020?
the AI generated message.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So what's going to happen next year that we need to be vigilant about? Expansion of contactless Pix. Now this is now we've moved into the in-store world, right? Where Pix in-store hasn't made as much penetration because contactless, you have cash, you have credit cards that work very well, you have contactless cards that work very well. However, Pix por aproximação or contactless Pix is expected to be available for all banks by February 2025. And contactless Pix is already being used for Google Pay users. Now, we don't have information or that much insight into how successful or how much this is ramped up. It's kind of only to a small subset of the population, but this is expected to launch more comprehensively in 2025, which could really be a massive impact, as well as the launch of Pix Automático. Now, this has been delayed several times. So again, that's also speculative, but recurring payments for Pix, for subscriptions, for bill payment, for digital subscriptions could also really be a game changer.
Is contactless Pix like a mobile wallet app on your mobile phone, or how
Correct.
does it? Yeah,
Correct.
okay.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Now, one new thing related to security is that in November of this year, they introduced a new transaction limit for Pix transactions for devices that are not registered with the user's bank, right? So you can't buy a burner phone or a prepaid phone and start making lots of high ticket transactions. There have been some security adjustments they've made in response to what's been going on. This is the newest example. Okay. So beyond Brazil, what's going on? On this chart, we see the share that A2A or RTPs are having in e-commerce, and then the line is the growth that they're experiencing. Okay, so Bolivia is an interesting example that we don't see hear of very much, but interoperable QR codes for Bolivia is a very interesting innovation in a very under-digitized market. PSA in Colombia, of course, is the #2 example after Brazil. SPAY in Mexico. This one is we haven't had a fintech or the central bank really succeed at converting SPAY into a very scalable user experience. Nevertheless, people are increasingly using SPAY to make consumer payments. And where bank transfers are growing over 50% year per year in e-commerce are Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Okay, so this is growing. This trend is growing. It's still a long way away from being the level of Pix. And in this copy paste model, there's a lot of attempts occurring, but it's triggering a massive revolution. And the next big event we will see is the launch of Colombia's central bank's RTP Breve. This has been in the works for quite a while, announced to launch in September of 2025. Again, that's quite speculative. But Breve is intended to unite and aggregate all of the different schemes that are operating in Colombia, including PSE, Transfilla, Nequi, DaviPlata, etc. Okay. Now, this is kind of an interesting hypothesis that I want to mention. I kind of see the way I see this happening is Pix in particular and A2A more generally is erasing the competitive advantage of wallets. All right. You can see this quote from Americanas, which is a merchant in Brazil, saying, we created our wallet to democratize payments, give access to our e-commerce platform for all Brazilians, no matter if they had a credit card or not. And of course, that's a very expensive endeavor, right? Launching and operating a wallet. And what they say here is that with Pix, this has already been done for us. We don't have to continue to invest in a wallet when a digital account is free and access to Pix is free and easy for almost every Brazilian. And now, so this particular merchant sees this to be as an advantage. Wallet isn't a huge part of their business, but for other wallets that operate under the ethos is I'm going to provide financial inclusion and provide banking services, and then I build loyalty into that. Pix has really created an equal playing field across all banks, neobanks, and wallets, and really, I think, obfuscated the difference between these digital players. Now, the intention of the central bank was to level the playing field across the industry, and it truly has done that. And what happens is as bank transfers become interoperable, free, and instant, it really doesn't matter which platform you use to access those rails. And it takes away the difference between what is a traditional bank versus a digital bank versus a neobank versus a wallet, right? Nubank has never been talked about as a wallet, but there really isn't very much difference between a Nubank and a PicPay or the digital banking platform of Itaú. So it's going to force these financial institutions to compete in new ways. And that is the intention, the long-term intention of these platforms. And that's already what's occurring in Asia, right? You've got all these interoperable QRs, all these interoperable payment schemes. The payment, you can't compete on the payment anymore. You can't rely on payments to attract users. So I don't think we've yet seen what that next revolution of innovation is going to be and value add. But it's really kind of creating erasing some of the competitive levers that companies have to play with. Okay. All right, and then for cards, what I want to say about credit cards is that cards are still in the lead, especially in early stage markets. Here you can see the percent of credit and debit cards in e-commerce, and with Ecuador being the highest and Brazil being the lowest. So in countries where there hasn't been this kind of digital revolution beyond cards, cards are still the primary payment method. And that might start to shift as these trends, deepen in other markets. But here you can see kind of where cards still have a massive massive share. But by 2027, credit and debit cards together will already represent less than 50% of the market. So this trajectory will continue of kind of leveling the playing field between cards and other types of payments. Okay. And then a final kind of interesting, as wallets kind of start to lose their acquisition power and their loyalty power, we're going to start to see different types of innovations, and NewPay from Nubank is one of these. What NewPay has done is launched. This was launched this year, but not necessarily very new. It's called Pix no Crédito, right? So I can, within my NewPay environment, my Nubank environment, I can purchase something with Pix and receive a loan from the bank to pay for that purchase. So it's like a buy now, pay later, or enabling you to buy on credit directly within Nubank using Pix rails. So it's a very interesting new type of payment. It's not a wallet. It's really a proprietary buy now, pay later, which is using central bank rails to provide that payment facility. This is very interesting, potentially very threatening to credit cards. And considering that Nubank has 100 million customers across Latin America. So this is very new. I haven't seen any other bank or anyone really chart this path, but it gives us an idea of what can happen down the line. Okay. Quickly going through cross-border. Claudia, to your point, we see the share of cross-border e-commerce growing. Okay, this is growing, not necessarily very quickly, but it is growing. That tells us that cross-border is growing faster than domestic, and it's going to represent it right now. It's at about 100 billion or 16% of the total market. And this is growing. A lot of these trends are specifically driving cross-border. So of course, the Asian merchants coming to Latin America, massive driver. The growth of digital goods, which primarily come from the United States, also Europe and Japan, driving this growth. And then there's an increasing number of payment processors specifically designed to help international merchants sell locally in Latin America. You guys all know who they are. And there's increasingly more and more of them who are deriving access to local payment methods. So Pix, PCMI in Colombia, which helps that number spike it right up. Excuse me. And just as credit card penetration can kind of be considered a proxy for how developed the local market is, we can see that a cross-border penetration is also a proxy for how developed that local market is, because you can see the highest shares of cross-border are in the more under-digitized markets: Paraguay, Panama, El Salvador, Bolivia. This means that e-commerce is still primarily Amazon, right? It's credit card holding, affluent people who know how to use e-commerce, are familiar with international brands, and are buying online, and that the local environment is not that developed yet. Brazil is all the way down at the bottom. Even though cross-border e-commerce in Brazil is massive, the overall penetration is small because the domestic market is so big.
Is that a result of the variety of goods and services of each of the markets?
Exactly. So if I have a well-developed, mature local market, I don't have to go outside as much, right? Okay. And then a final on taxes, this kind of tells us, this shows us the share of digital goods in e-commerce with respect to the VAT on digital services. And increasingly digital services are being taxed. Cross-border digital services are being taxed. This is a trend that's taken place, started in Argentina and has spread across the region. At the same time, though, we also see this flip-flop in Argentina, where in its process of deregulation occurring right now, these taxes are being taken away, and we see cross-border e-commerce go up. So that's the biggest impacting factor. What does the regulation say about cross-border transactions? Are they permitted? Are they penalized, etc., to predict what's going to happen in the short term? Okay. All right, so wrapping up again, this will be available for you all. The recording will be on the website. This PDF will be available. We'll have an extended version. If you want the data, you can inquire about how to actually get the data. So we love playing with this stuff. These numbers help us see into what is actually happening and make projections and make ultimately decisions. But from a storytelling standpoint, what do we make of all of this, right? Credit is still safe, okay? Right now. Credit is still safe. Why? Because even though these competing payment rails are exploding at a much faster rate, it's a rising tide raises all ships, right? It's expanding the digital pie for everyone, and credit card volume is still growing. Now we will be projecting out at what point do we think is credit going to stagnate and potentially decline, if that will happen. So that's the next kind of step in our analysis. So credit cards are still safe. However, debit cards is what is in true jeopardy, in true danger as A2A grows. In Brazil, debit is over. Debit in e-commerce is over. And increasingly in-store, it has a very short shelf life. In the rest of the market, Mexico is a strong debit market. The question is for how long, as SPAY ramps up, as maybe that becomes more user-friendly, and some of in Peru and Colombia and Argentina, where A2A is getting some real traction, how much life does debit have is a big question. Okay. The next one of the next disruptions or waves of innovation we'll see, I think, are going to be following this new pay case, new ways of embedding credit in the commerce journey, payment flexibility, including split payments and credit over those A2A rails. Once you have effective A2A rails, the next thing is, how do I fractionalize commerce? How do I use those rails to provide more affordable options to customers? Just like credit card installments have worked for decades in Latin America, how can we use Pix or other bank rails to create the same phenomenon? Okay. Everything becoming a pass-through, right? That's what these wallets, that was the point around wallets, banks, neobanks, all becoming a similar type platform where with low-cost rails available, now the payment's just a pass-through. So they become a digital environment for that pass-through, and you have to start thinking about other ways to add value into that wallet if your wallet and loyalty to that wallet and retention is your primary strategy. This also really positions Apple Pay and Google Pay well, because those other wallets are losing their advantage vis-a-vis these big tech wallets. Okay, and then finally, just a question that I think is interesting to consider is, will there be a revert back to cash for international tourists as A2A payments proliferate, especially small merchants that are not very loyal or connected to a POS and prefer a local A2A payment? You know, as that continues to occur and international tourists come ready to pay with cards, are they going to have to revert back to cash? Right? And really, this is a question of what is going to happen with POS penetration and acceptance among small business, right? If the card networks do not aggressively expand acceptance beyond their traditional base, we're going to see a revert to A2A and even a revert back to cash in some cases. This is already happening in the Netherlands. Just the anecdotal storytelling I hear from folks who go there, and Ideal, right, is accepted everywhere. Cards are accepted in the major establishments. But if you go to a restaurant or a small store, it's ideal, or cash. So, and that's in the Netherlands, right? So very interesting potential implications going ahead. All right. I think that's my last slide today, guys. So any other comments or questions? Any other reactions? Anything else anyone wants to chime in on?
Hey, Lindsay,
Comments here?
this is Daniel.
Hi, Danny.
Hi, how are you? So I didn't, not a topic here, but just interested in your perspective with the advent of crypto and stable coins becoming kind of a key topic in the US, given the changes in the administration and the posture. What do you think the impact will be in Latin America as a more viable channel? I mean, there's a lot of noise in the market right now. I don't know how much of that it's real versus just that noise. So interested in any perspectives on that.
So I do believe stablecoin has a lot of opportunity for remittances. In everyday commerce, I would say no. For remittances and cross-border payment, I believe it is a very powerful and potentially transformational technology. I've seen some fantastic use cases where truly the user experience is superior. Truly, it's magical and amazing. And if those, Felix Pago being one, if those guys can scale, or if some of the larger players start to utilize those rails, we could see that really take over, because the experience, the cost, the speed is truly superior. And the good thing, the consumer doesn't need to know that it's a blockchain based transaction. There's no reason for them. They don't have to understand that. As long as the transaction works, they have some sort of guarantee or trust in the brand, and it works, then I believe it could be very powerful if companies take the initiative to push it forward. Yeah.
Thanks.
Great. Well, I will leave you all there. Thank you so much for your time. It's always wonderful to see you and to hear your questions. It always keeps me thinking, always keeps me on my toes. We have a lot, this is a lot of data. We're going to continue to chew this and look at how things evolve in 2025. All of these resources will be available to you guys. If you want more information or more data or go deeper, get in touch with me. And beyond that, I just want to really, truly thank you from the bottom of my heart, guys, for your participation, for always, trusting in us to help provide you with insight, to provide your knowledge. It's been a wonderful journey this year. Really appreciate it. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays to all of you. Please keep in touch over the past couple months. We'll get started in February, most likely of next year. So we will see you then. Take care. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Thank you, Lindsay. Excellent reviews. Thank you. Happy holidays.
Lindsay, thank you very much. Merry
Thank you,
Christmas and
Lindsay.
Happy New
Yes.
Year,
Thank
Lindsay.
you. Thank you to
Bye
all of you.
bye.
Muchas gracias. Felices fiestas a todos. Chao, chao.